Hi, Matt Sanders here. A short word on the idea of being in the role of being a privileged listener. One of the wonderful roles, one of the key roles that we serve as chaplains is to listen to people right here. And so I just wanted to share briefly on this topic to encourage you in your role as a listener. As we serve as a listener, one of the principles that's key is that we are not being anxious to impart our knowledge to the person that we are sitting with. Rather, we're being very patient and we're inviting the other to tap into their own internal wisdom that they already have. I might have tremendous amounts of wisdom and knowledge that I can share with others, but they might forget it 30 seconds after I said it. But if we can encourage them, encourage the other to tap into their own deep well of wisdom, of knowledge, of experience, of exploring possibilities, then that can really help them to bring out that richness that's within them and help them to nurture the guidance that's already present within them. A short story example, and I can share this without revealing any identity of anybody, but I met with a woman who was facing an amputation of her toes. Diabetes is a terrible disease. She had already had toes on one foot removed, and she was facing amputation on the other foot. She described herself as feeling despondent. That was the word. That's a heavy word. It's really tough. And she looked it. And so I just sat with her. I was in the role of privileged listener. Now, as chaplains, sometimes we're not really doing work that feels a whole lot like chaplaincy because maybe we're in the midst of a crisis and we're not really able to sit down and quietly listen to another. But in those moments, which might feel a little too rare, it's such a gift, a jewel, to be able to sit quietly and to listen to the other. And so I just had a chance to hear what she was going through. And as she talked about her own experience with her illness and the struggle and her worries and so forth, she tapped into the notion of God having a sense of humor. And I thought, sense of humor, isn't that something? And so she was at one point thanking God for a sense of humor. And then she said, she looked at her one foot that had the toes had already been amputated, but it was healed up nicely, actually. She said, you know what? I think my foot's kind of cute. And then she went on to describe having a doll when she was a child, had a foot kind of like that. And so I thought, isn't that an amazing way to view and frame her experience? How beautiful. You see, I didn't have to impart my wisdom and knowledge to her to help her feel better. No. She already had that inside of her, but I was just a privileged listener to hear it as she spoke about it and nurtured herself with her own inner strength. And so on this theme of humor, with the toes on one foot having been amputated, facing the amputation of the other toes and the other foot, she said, with kind of a grim sense of humor, she says, you know what? It's a good thing that we don't have 3 legs, because then I'd have to face having them amputated too, maybe. And I just laughed. It was just so both grim and funny at the same time, and we laughed together as she tapped into that humor. And humor is a gift to manage, to adjust, to deal with the struggle and the pains of life, isn't it? So, keys to listening. Oh, there are a lot, but I just want to close by mentioning 3 very briefly. One is what my supervisor in chaplaincy used to say. He says, show up and shut up. So we show up. Well, we don't show up with a big agenda, not some big long list that we're going to talk about. No, we exercise a discipline to quiet our mind, quiet our mouth, quiet our mind, quiet our heart, and listen to what the other has to say. Listening well requires a discipline. The fact is, not everybody's a good listener. Some people are terrible listeners. They butt in after a sentence and a half, and it's like, you're not hearing what I'm saying. So to offer the gift of listening is a beautiful gift, but it does require a discipline of the mind, a discipline of the emotions, of being with one emotion, being with your emotions. You see, no matter how, like if a person tells an experience, and if you've had some parallel experience, it's so similar, and you're dying to tell them, oh, the same thing happened to me. You know what? It doesn't matter. Don't say it. Unless the situation really calls for it, and that will help them to identify and feel safe, for example. But for the most part, don't say it. They don't care. In our role as chaplain, when we have our chaplain hat on, it's not about us. It's about what they need. So that's one. Show up and shut up. And that shutting up requires a discipline. Number 2, seek first to understand. This requires a humility. The older I get, the more I value humility and patience, how important these are, and how almost boring they are. You know, we want power and strength and influence, but instead what God gives us is the invitation to grow in humility and patience. And when we seek first to understand, when we're sitting in our role of privileged listener, trying to understand the person, then that in itself is a gift. Even if we don't have a clue how to, quote, help them, we don't have a clue as to how to give them a word of advice that's going to be practical and useful, even if we don't have a clue about that, you know, it's a real gift just to try to understand a person, isn't it? An interesting meditation can be to think about a person in your own life who has sought very well to understand you and who just listened, who just patiently listened. Number 3, last key I'm going to mention on this idea of being a privileged listener is follow up on key words. So this is the principle of curiosity. As you're listening to someone, just pay attention to what strikes you as a key word. Like when this woman I mentioned earlier, she mentioned the word despondent. Whoa, that's a key word. I might follow up on that. Not intrusively. Don't be intrusive. Why not? That's annoying. Don't be intrusive. But gently asking the question, despondent, wow, that's significant. Or in the case she mentioned, humor. Like God has a sense of humor. It's like, humor? Boy, for sure, that's a beautiful a quality to think of God. I don't often think of that. Earlier in a visit, actually today, I was speaking with a man who had an experience in which he was very scared, and I said, wow, you were very frightened, very scared. Just by saying that word, just not like a technique, because it gets annoying if the person feels like, I know it does for me, if you feel like someone's throwing a technique your way. You know, it's not a formula, but it's helpful to follow up with a key word, a key concept, just to open them up to say more. So I think I will leave it at that. May you practice discipline and humility and curiosity in your role as privileged listener. God bless. Peace.